Good to see you all. I think, as is our wont, we'll start with a prayer, if that's okay. So let's just take a moment to put ourselves in the right place for the evening ahead. Heavenly Father, we're here before you today with hearts full of curiosity and joy, and we thank you for bringing us together for this special occasion and for the technology that lets us be together when we're physically far apart. We ask for your presence to fill this space, guiding our conversations and any decisions or activities. May this event be a time of connection, inspiration, and growth. Bless everybody here, the people that have helped to facilitate it, the participants who are attending, and our guest speaker. Grant us wisdom, patience, and kindness as we interact with each other, and let this gathering be a reflection of your love in fostering unity and understanding. Amen. So we welcome this evening Mike Mullins. Mike is a leadership coach and a spiritual retreat facilitator. His background is in Catholic. If I get any of this wrong, Mike, just kick me under the table. His background is in Catholic mysticism and psychology, and he's run retreats on a whole range of themes, from finding the divine in the margins of life, masculine spirituality and personality differences, to the ineffable nature of the divine. Inspired by his liberal Catholic faith, he has a deep interest in interfaith dialogue and believes that no one faith has a monopoly on the truth. We can all learn from each other if we meet in a spirit of humble inquiry, hunger for truth, and compassion for all. As Meister Eckhart said, theologians may quarrel, but the mystics of the world speak the same language. So I'm now going to hand over to Mike, who's going to speak to us for half an hour or so, and then we'll have time for questions. I'll monitor the questions that come up in the chat and the people who put their hands up, and try and get you in order so that as many people as possible get their questions answered. I can see a few people talking about having unstable connections, or maybe it's me dropping in and out. So we'll keep fingers tightly crossed that that's not the case when Mike starts to talk. Mike, I'm going to hand over to you if that's okay.
Fantastic. Thanks, Kat. Can everybody hear me? Yeah, you can. Lovely. That's super. Well, I mean, really lovely to be with you all this Wednesday evening. As I was saying earlier on to Kat, I'm currently down in Salcombe with my wife Paula, who's actually downstairs, and she's online as well, listening to this talk. So I've got to be on my best behaviour. We're having a rather belated summer holiday. I had a knee operation in the 1st of August, so we weren't able to get away in August. So we've taken an October break. So we're having a lovely time down here in Devon. And the background I've got is not actually Devon; it's Somerset on a previous holiday. I want to say thank you to Damien, who I actually met on a soul rewilding retreat that I was running, and he invited me to speak tonight. And I also want to thank Kat for organising it. So thank you, Kat. I'm very humbled to be here talking to you all. I would say I'm no expert in the field I'm going to talk about. I would describe myself as an enthusiastic amateur. So if I get anything wrong in terms of the facts, then please do correct me at the end. I grew up, I'm 60 now, but I grew up mid-60s, early 70s in Wiltshire, in a small village. And I was surrounded by nature, and I loved it. And now my wife and I live in London, and I think we live in a world and in a country that has become very nature depleted. Over the last 5 years or so, I've been involved in Extinction Rebellion and also Christian Climate Action, and I know you've got quite a few CCA members who are members of Green Christian. And I think maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I came to the point where I felt that protest wasn't enough, that actually spirituality sat at the heart of ecological crisis. So I founded what I would describe as a group of like-minded Christians. I founded a group called Soul Rewilding, which was really dedicated to helping people explore their spirituality in the light of the ecological crisis, helping them reconnect to nature and find a more humble path. The original title of this talk was about how Christianity has contributed to the ecological crisis. I was just saying to Kat actually before we came on that I actually want to widen um, uh, the talk. I don't want to put all the blame on our faith because I don't think it is solely to blame for where we are at the moment. I think there are various other factors. I think, in a sense, that if Christianity is part of the problem, or if some of our beliefs that we promulgate with Christianity is part of the problem, I also believe that it is part of the solution to our ecological crisis. So that's what I'd like to end on, if you like, an antidote to some of the issues that we have. So in a sense, my talk today is really, or this afternoon, this evening rather, is really about human exceptionalism. Kat was saying that some of you have been talking about this whole idea of human exceptionalism, so hopefully it won't be completely new to you. Anyway, so I'll start. So I think from earliest times, human belief systems have asserted that somehow we are special, we're different from the usual, often in a way that's better, that's unique or important, that we stand out really from the rest of nature. And for thousands of years, we've lived in a way that perhaps means that we're not animal. We haven't seen ourselves as animal. And I think that's such an unconscious belief that we don't often acknowledge it or challenge it. And I think tonight what I'd like to do is to challenge that. Our faith, the Christian tradition, with its emphasis on man as created in the image of God becoming man, salvation for man, life after death, and a hierarchy that starts with a male God and moves down to angels, then man, then woman, then animals, plants, rock, and soil at the bottom of the hierarchy, is perhaps, in a way, the apotheosis of human exceptionalism. And in many ways, our faith, that Christianity, is perhaps the most anthropocentric of faiths. And in some ways, it's no surprise, it's no wonder that Christianity has given birth to atheistic humanism. So in this talk, what I'd like to do is examine if this belief in human exceptionalism is true, and perhaps more importantly, what are the psychological and the spiritual consequences of this deeply ingrained belief? I find myself increasingly believing that this deeply held worldview sits at the heart of our current ecological crisis. If it does, then the question we need to ask ourselves is, what's the antidote? So why are we as a species so obsessed with proving and reproving the idea that we're unique and special? What's driving that? I'm no biologist, although I'm very proud of the fact I did get a B in O level biology. But my guess is that actually this desire to feel that we're special is an evolutionary response, and that other animals, whether it's cats or dogs or birds, feel exactly the same way about themselves. They think they're special too. I mean, let's face it, we all think we're special and unique. I know I did in my teens. I learned otherwise when I got into my 20s and my 30s. So maybe, though, we actually have more in common with our animal siblings than we care to admit. So I think history is littered with examples of human exceptionalist thinking. So it's not just Christianity that does this. Lots of human philosophies and religions do it. And here are just a few examples. So if you go back to hunter-gatherers, they saw humans as having quite a unique relationship with spirits, with ancestors and nature. Their myths gave human beings a central role. the children of creators, mediators between worlds, or the very reason why worlds exist, the world existed. And if you look at Sumerian or Egyptian, Indus and Chinese civilizations, they thought that humans were fashioned from divine materials. In the age of Plato and Aristotle, the axial age, they claimed that human beings were unique because of their capacity for reason and morality. Eastern faiths, Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, all claimed humans were unique because of our capacity for enlightenment or liberation. They have a hierarchy as well, just like us as Christians. Confucianism, Chinese Confucianism, claimed humanity was unique because we had a moral duty to develop virtue. The Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Islam, and our faith, Christianity, went one step further with the strongest claim to specialness, teaching that man was created in the image of God, imago Dei, and was given stewardship over creation. Now, during the Renaissance and Enlightenment, humans were celebrated for their uniqueness on account of our creativity, reason, and dignity. So Christianity is not alone in promoting this belief, though you could argue it took it to new heights. Now, modern science may have challenged the idea of humans being biologically separate, but some science still pushes exceptionalism, noting supposedly unique traits in man like language, abstract thought, culture, cumulative knowledge, our capacity for symbolic reasoning, transcendence, spiritual intelligence, technology, and collaboration as unparalleled and as unique. The interesting thing, though, is over the last 10, 20 years, research by biologists and ethologists. So an ethologist is basically somebody that studies animal behavior, have proved that other animals have all of these traits, all of them. Maybe not in such an extreme way that we have them, but animals have all these traits. So we have a split in a way in the human condition. We see the human world as the highest good, human flourishing as all important. We have a deeply uneasy relationship with the idea of being animal. You'll have to forgive me, everybody. I'm reading from my notes. So in these pauses, I'm turning over my pages. I hope it's not too distracting. Anyway, let's first explore the latest biological arguments against the idea of humans being inherently unique. And then we'll go on to explore the psychological and spiritual consequences of such a belief. Finally, we'll end with some tentative suggestions about what the way forward might look like spiritually. Despite what many believe, evolution does not involve a direction. It can progress from single cell to multicellular, or it can go back. So from an evolutionary, atheistic standpoint, humans are one species amongst millions, the result of the same natural processes, whether that's random mutation, natural selection, genetic drift, and adaptation that shape all life. So the idea of humans being a pinnacle or a purpose of evolution is what theologians might call a teleological fallacy. In other words, projecting purpose onto a purposeless process. However, there are many theologians and scientists, so Teilhard de Chardin, the more recent Kenneth Miller, who wrote the book Finding Darwin's God, and Stephen Barr, who wrote the book Modern Physics and Ancient Faith, who would dispute that. And they would argue that the divine works through evolution, and her purpose is to express her joy through the act of creation. Randomness for these scientists and theologians doesn't mean meaninglessness. They talk about an eternal becoming. So by emptying herself, kenosis, into becoming all beings, so all being, all life are the divine's purpose. We, Homo sapiens, appeared very late in the story of life on Earth, about 300,000 years ago. At about 2300 hours and 58 minutes, so 2 minutes to midnight, if you were to take the life of the 4.5 billion year old Earth as compressed into 24 hours. So in a way, claiming that we are the central and sole purpose of creation is rather like asserting that the actor who appears in the end credits of the film is the central character. If you rewound the evolutionary clock, humans, at least Homo sapiens as we know them, might never have existed. And many evolutionary biologists like Stephen Jay Gould emphasize the role of chance and contingency in evolution. So this questions the notion of humans as inevitable or being a privileged outcome. It also suggests that in the act of creation, the divine itself limited itself and joyfully embraced uncertainty and a degree of powerlessness. So as the great German theologian and martyr Dietrich Bonhoeffer said, God is weak and powerless in the world, and that is the only way in which he can be with us and help us. And I think this presents a very unsettling challenge to our traditional Abrahamic notion of an all-powerful, all-knowing God. And I think there are parallels with the Christian notion of kenosis, or emptying, and also the Jewish Kabbalistic idea of tzimtzum, or withdrawal. The 16th century Jewish mystic Isaac Luria taught that the Ein Sof, or God the Infinite, withdrew to allow space for creation, placing limits on herself. Perhaps like Meister Eckhart, the 14th century Dominican mystic, who once prayed, "I pray to God to rid me of my concept of God," we are being gently invited to question our notion of the Godhead amidst the ecological crisis. So as I noted earlier on, traits like language, abstract thought, culture, cumulative knowledge, our capacity for symbolic reasoning, transcendence, spiritual intelligence, collaboration and technology, once thought uniquely human, are now seen by biologists and ethologists in other species. Here are just a few examples, and I'm just going to illustrate what I'm talking about with some stories. So cephalopods, octopuses, squids, and cuttlefish are highly evolved, intelligent, and boisterous. So different from us that scientists regard them as probably the closest thing we have to aliens on Earth. They are the most intelligent of the invertebrates. Now, there's a New Zealand octopus called Inky who escaped from the National Aquarium in Napier, New Zealand, by climbing through his tank's overflow valve, scampering 8 feet across the floor, and then sliding down a narrow 106-foot drainpipe into the ocean. At another aquarium near Dundee in New Zealand, an octopus called Sid, I love these names, they're great names, escaped so many times by hiding in buckets, opening doors, and climbing up and down stairs that he was eventually released back into the ocean. Otto, this is a German octopus, Otto, an octopus in the aquarium at Coburg, Germany, would juggle hermit crabs. Once, the electricity in the aquarium kept shorting, stopping the lights and the filters from working, which was affecting the other life in the aquarium. Staff were so worried that they decided to actually sleep overnight in the aquarium to find out what was going on. And as they slept in the aquarium, they were awoken by Otto, the octopus, swinging himself to the top of his tank and then squirting water at a low-hanging light bulb that was keeping him awake. He'd worked out how to turn the lights off. I love that. So another example of animal intelligence. Wild orcas, so those are killer whales, often approach humans on boats or near the shore and offer them prey items, fish, birds, or even dead seals, by dropping them near humans, sometimes waiting or returning to see what happens. And this suggests curiosity. It suggests a social awareness, perhaps even an attempt to build cross-species relationships. In 2018, there was a famous incident of a female orca known as Tahlequah carrying the body of her deceased calf for 17 consecutive days, so over 2 weeks, for over 1,600 kilometers. That's about, I think, it's over 1,000 miles, refusing to abandon it or let it sink. So that talks of grief. It talks of empathy. My favorite are corvids. And there's a researcher called Michael Westerfield who's done a lot of research into the intelligence of corvids. So observing corvids he revealed that they are able to communicate in a way that human beings once believed were unique to primates and cetaceans. So, as I said, Michael Westerfield has shown that crows have different sounds that indicate humans, cats, and dogs. But they can also distinguish between different cats. So they have calls for an old cat who does not hunt, and they have calls for young cats that do hunt that might be a threat to them as crows. So crows have language. So you'll have heard recently that Jane Goodall has just died. She's one of my heroes. This is a lady originally that had no background in biology or ethology. The anthropologist Louis Leakey, Louis Leakey, when he first met Jane Goodall, decided to invite her to study the primates at Gombe National Park, Tanzania, because he wanted researchers unbiased by some of the rather reductionist thinking of most ethologists at the time. So she did decades-long research into chimpanzees in the forest. The spectacular waterfalls there held a deep fascination for chimpanzees, and sometimes a chimpanzee would approach one of these waterfalls, and she noticed that their hair would stand on end, and this was a sign of heightened emotional arousal. As the chimpanzees got closer to the waterfall, they would perform a magnificent display, swaying rhythmically from foot to foot, stamping in the shallow rushing water, picking up and hurling great rocks. And then they would grab vines hanging down from the waterfall above them and would swing out into the spray of the falling water. These waterfall dances would last for 10 to 15 minutes. Goodall saw them as a precursor to religious ritual, a sign that chimpanzees experience wonder and awe. So, in our sense of transcendence is, according to Goodall, not limited to us. Primates experience it. So, before Homo sapiens, several other hominin species, so members of the human lineage after the split from our last common ancestor with chimpanzees, played key roles in human evolution. Neanderthals were 99.7% genetically similar to us. Homo erectus, an earlier Homo species, likely to have a 97 to 99% similarity. Australopithecus is estimated to have a 95 to 97% similarity genetically based on morphology and evolutionary distance. So on what basis do we assume we're special, set apart compared to these hominins? Especially when the evidence suggests that we may have lived alongside them, bred with them, and maybe even killed them. Perhaps they are just our oldest sisters and brothers in the divine family, equally loved and special to the divine. So most mainstream biologists now don't see humans as a discontinuity in evolution, but rather a continuity. Human capacities are extensions of abilities found in other animals. And historical biological studies have forced our own human biases onto animals and defining intelligence and consciousness and spirituality in human terms, so consistently underestimating their presence in animals. So we've talked a little bit there about why perhaps we're not so unique. Let's now explore the arguments, the psychological and spiritual arguments against the idea of seeing ourselves as unique. So if the belief that we're unique in the animal world is based on rather flimsy, biased evidence, even more crucial is the question of what the psychological and spiritual consequences are of telling ourselves that we are different, unique, and special. We all know the dangers of telling our kids that they're special, unique, with the implication that they're better than other kids. So let's start with the positive side. What are the positive psychological consequences of seeing ourselves as special? Well, I suppose if we see ourselves as special and having a unique place in the life of the earth, that does wonders for our self-esteem. It will perhaps add depth and meaning to our sense of purpose, and perhaps protects us from despair when life becomes tough. All of those are great things. There are, though, psychological difficulties associated with believing that we're special and unique. The first is that it might encourage narcissism, a sense of entitlement, superiority, difficulty empathizing with other humans and animals. And I think we can see some of this in how we currently treat wild and domesticated animals. If being special is internalized as being different from others, it may create a sense of disconnection, a lack of curiosity about the gifts and experiences of other sentient beings, and perhaps ultimately feelings of loneliness and difficulty forming intimate and equal relationships. And I think those are all things that characterize our current ecological crisis. And it's no wonder that many biologists now say we're living in the age of the Eremocene, the age of loneliness, rather than the Anthropocene. There are positive spiritual consequences of seeing ourselves as unique. It can give us a sacred sense of self. Believing you're special can encourage a reverence for life. A sense of being special or gifted can inspire service, devotion, a deeper engagement with spiritual practice. It can cultivate faith, trust that life's events unfold with significance, even if they're difficult. There are, though, I think, real spiritual challenges with seeing ourselves as unique and special. This belief may morph into spiritual pride, ego, feeling more evolved, chosen in ways that disconnect us from humility and compassion for other beings. Life hardships may feel like betrayals. If I'm special, why is this happening to me? Leading to doubt, despair, or spiritual crises. I love Job's response to God. I love God's response to Job, rather. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Ouch. I bet that brought Job back down to earth, the poor chap. So many spiritual traditions, Buddhism, Hinduism, and also Christianity, encourage us to transcend our ego self and argue that over-identifying with being special may become an obstacle to realizing our oneness, our interconnectedness with each other and with the universe. And I think in its most extreme form, the madness of human exceptionalism says we are more deserving of the riches of the earth, that the laws that constrain growth on earth don't apply to us, and that economic well-being is more important than the continuity of life on earth. And when you reflect on that, because that's what we believe, that's how we run our society, that seems utterly insane. When humans are seen as outside or above the web of life, spiritual experience risks becoming very abstract rather than embodied. We become estranged from our bodies, nature, and the cosmos. Thinkers like Thomas Berry and Joanna Macy, another fantastic woman that we lost recently, and deep ecology philosophers, as I'm sure all of you know, argue that this belief in human specialness fuels ecological exploitation and destruction. So the belief in human uniqueness is a form of spiritual ego, a barrier, I think, to enlightenment, to harmony, and reverence for life. Seeing ourselves as above other life forms feeds what Buddhists might describe as Maya, the illusion of separation. And it becomes a mindset that's easily manipulated to justify the objectification, exploitation, and the destruction of the natural world. So that's all the negative stuff. So what's the antidote? Well, I think perhaps our challenge is to relearn that we belong to Mother Earth, that we are animal in all the loveliness and beauty that that entails. And I think that means a spiritual self-abasement, but rather a realistic worldview that recognizes that we're not above other beings, but exist as part of a family. Perhaps it's our deep fear of being animal, our fear of suffering, of pain, of anxiety, society of loneliness and death that makes us assert our difference. It is about learning to overcome that fear and embrace our smallness, our humility, our place in the family of being, not our centrality. Compassionate and their contribution to the web of life. Over the past 200 years, there have been two major, what I would describe as effective revolutions or empathetic revolutions, where society has woken up to the essential humanity and dignity, first of black people and then of women. And after much struggle, given them their rights. And perhaps we're on the cusp of a third effective revolution, where we truly discover the dignity and worth of all animal life. I think letting go of the enlightenment mindset that sees all of nature as soulless, inanimate objects, and instead learning to adopt what I would describe as a participative mindset, an animist mindset, will help us re-enchant our world with soul and respect. That humility and participative mindset in turn will teach us that we're linked in webs of reciprocity with all other forms of life, and that our survival depends on other beings, rejoicing in our kinship with all living things and taking on the bonds and obligations of family. So it's all about, I would say, adopting a kincentric model, family model, rather than the patriarchal hierarchy. Just because we're not central doesn't mean to say we're not loved or adored by the divine. The last child in a large family isn't loved any less for being last. We're part of a wider family, all sentient beings, in which all are in the image of the divine and loved by the divine. So as Richard Rohr, the Franciscan mystic, says, God loves all things by becoming all things. In our individual and collective spiritual journey, sometimes I think we get to a point on the path where it stops. There seems to be no way forward. Our common narrative can't take us forward. And I think perhaps we're at that point now. So our role as storytellers, perhaps, is to look back and to ask ourselves, where have we come from? We perhaps need to go back to our roots. Desmond Tutu says that our problem is that we just don't know that we belong. We're the animal that doesn't want to be an animal. Our challenge now, I think, is one of radical hospitality. How do we create a loving space for all beings to belong? And what might that story of belonging actually sound like? Can we enlarge the stories we tell ourselves in our sacred places, in our churches, in our temples, in our sanghas, in our mosques, in our everyday, to make room large enough for all humans and non-humans to truly belong? We need to remember we make things holy by the attention we give things. We need to ask the question, what's the story that can hold us together in this moment? And by us, I mean all humans and other than human life, our older, wiser sisters, brothers, and we, their younger, foolish siblings. Saints, Hildegard, Francis of Assisi, Meister Eckhart can provide a clue that holds us all together in this moment of crisis. The lives of the Celtic saints paint a picture of a people deeply and humbly attached to animals and to birds. And to give you a flavour of this, I'm going to share just one story from the Irish Celtic tradition that might give us a clue as to what a new Christian story of belonging might sound like. Is everybody sitting comfortably? Then we'll begin. So a long, long time ago, there was a young man, a Celtic monk, carrying the host, the body of Christ, across Ireland one spring. At times this could be a joyful duty for him, and he was as light as a feather. At other times it could be hard and trying, and it burdened him down with the sheer responsibility. As he walked that spring day, tired and burdened, he saw across the wildflower meadow what seemed like a smoke cloud in the air coming towards him. As it drew closer, he realized it was a swarm of bees. They swarmed around the young monk, not in anger, but in joy and in sheer ecstasy. They were the Hildegard of Bingen, the Francis of Assisi of bee swarms. As he found himself in the midst of this ecstatic swarm, he grew heavy, drowsy, and passed out, falling down into the soft, long grass. When he awoke some hours later that evening, the bees had gone, and so too had the body of Christ, the host. He was horrified. Oh no, sweet Jesus, what do I do? And like many a Celt, he bottled up his guilt and troubles, and instead of confessing, he wandered forlorn throughout Ireland in his search for the lost body of Christ, telling no one of his shame. Exactly 1 year later, he sat to rest on a rock by a clear, cold stream alongside an ancient oak forest. Exhausted and burdened, he finally confessed out loud, I lost the body of Christ. At this confession, an angel suddenly appeared and knelt before him. It wasn't cherubic, as we like to imagine angels, but it was wild. His body was naked and as green as grass, with only oak leaves and ivy for clothing. His long, unkempt hair covered in moss and lichen. Despite this, the angel held him lovingly and gently in his gaze, leant forward to hold the monk's hand, and said, I heard your story, dear friend. It must have been such a burden. Why didn't you share your guilt? You must have suffered so much. I should have told you. The bee swarm you met a year ago were a welcoming committee. It has always been agreed that the bees would care for Christ's body this year. There was no failure on your part. If you look over there by the edge of the stream, you'll find a chapel made of beeswax and the bees saying mass with their honey nectar. They've made honey from your imagined failure. Now you are healed with your confession. You can be a servant to the bee chapel, bringing pilgrims far and wide to hear bee mass and be taught by the bees about working together for the glory of all creation and all life. And that's what he did for the rest of his life. He was that guide. And on his death, the bees sang ancient Irish hymns and raised his body to heaven. So I think creation, the universe, I think is all about relationality. We are connected to everything else. So as we close the talk today, I'm just going to invite you just to ground yourselves, to place 2 feet on the ground, to sit upright. And if you'd like to, just to close your eyes and to relax. And just slowly breathe in and breathe out. Just slowly breathe in and breathe out. Can you sense as you breathe in and breathe out? Can you sense where the air is separate to you? Can you sense when it becomes part of you? There is no point in our body where we can say the air is separate, where the air ends and where we begin. We're breathing in air that has come from thousands of miles away and has been breathed in by thousands, hundreds of thousands of others, animals and human beings over thousands, nay, millions of years. So ultimately, it's about recognizing at a much deeper level, hidden behind a veil, that we're all one. The self is not separate from the rest of existence. All beings share the same fundamental essence, whether Brahmin, Buddha nature, Tao, or in our Christian mystical tradition, the divine spark or isness. If I harm another being, a tree, a river, then ultimately I harm myself. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. That gave me a huge amount to think about. For those who might not know, the part of Green Christian in which we have been chatting lately about this idea of human exceptionalism, can't speak, human exceptionalism, is Borrowed Time, which is a project of Green Christian for those in ministry or lay people who believe that if not complete collapse, we're walking into a very messy time and we need to consider our responses to that, how we can walk in with love and courage and compassion. And we hope become the kind of people God always intended us to be. And I have just posted in the chat something that my colleague Ruth, who most of you know, shared the other day, which explains why we try not to use the words stewards or dominion. There's lots of debate over the original translations, and I'm not a student of Hebrew, Aramaic, or Greek, so I can't really speak to that. But the scriptures have been translated by humans with agenda, and so it's maybe a leap to assume that we have that dominion. I'm going to open the floor up to those people who have questions, and you can either put your hand up physically, I'll try and keep an eye out for you, or use the tool, which you'll find in the footer bar of your screen, or you can put something in the chat on which subject. I'd just like to invite Judith. You put a really good point earlier on to the point of human exceptionalism, and I don't know whether you'd like to speak to that or.
It was just the observation that although we talk about human exceptionalism, it seems to me, as a species, we use it for a few people who are exceptional, but most humans end up being the equivalent of a beast of burden or factory fodder. And I often feel that is another big area of injustice that underlies a lot of our current sort of ecological and economic crises. They're not quite sure it's a question, more sort of an observation.
Thank you. I can see Jeff has a hand up. Jeff, would you like to unmute and put your question? Oh, your hand's gone down. Was it an accidental hand? Bishop Laurie, fire away.
Just unmuting. I think you can hear me.
Yes.
Some of you will know me well as being a very urbanized creature. Yes, most definitely. Mike, thanks ever so much, by the way. Very urbanized, however. So whilst my wife, who is a country lass by heart, resonates emotionally with natural surroundings, objects in the wild, if you like, I simply don't. I look at a landscape and it's a landscape largely made man-made and all that stuff. Whereas I have a sense of awe and spiritual emotion, if you like, feel it within cities, within the stuff of urbanization. I heard you say, and towards the end, I think you were saying things which did resonate very much with me. The air, But you did say we might treat animals as inanimate objects. I don't find any problem with seeing an inanimate object like bread or wine or a brick as being a place where one meets spiritual matter. And I wondered where that sort of thing comes into your life and experience, or if at all.
I think the urban environment, I think cathedrals and many buildings and can be very beautiful and awe-inspiring, and that doesn't surprise me at all. I think you can find God in both in nature and in the urban. I think what I talked about the participative mindset or the animist mindset, and I think perhaps before the emergence of not necessarily Christianity, but before the emergence of maybe monotheistic religions, which push God up there into heaven, most human beings had an animist mindset. In other words, they would enter into they would imagine in their minds what it would be like to be another animal. They had empathy for deer. They had empathy for wild boar, and there's lots of evidence to suggest that the paintings you see, the paintings you see in caves at Lascaux and elsewhere, came out of that mindset. And I suppose that mindset allowed them to respect the world, to know the world of nature, and to love it and to treat it with perhaps more respect than our post-Enlightenment scientific approach, which is to see things as inanimate and as just as objects. So I suppose in a sense what I'm arguing is that in a way what we need to do perhaps with a new spirituality is to rediscover that participative mindset, that animist mindset. And that would apply to trees or to plants, not just animals. I think that's what I was hinting at, suggesting. Yeah. So the objectivity of science is really helpful. It's really useful, but it isn't the only path to knowledge and to, and it may actually inhibit us building relationship and connection to nature.
Thanks, Mike. Thank you, Laurie. Christine has been sitting patiently with her hand up. Then I will take 2 points from the chat and then over to you, Stephen, if that's okay. So, Christine, if you are okay to... There you go, you've unmuted.
Yeah, a couple of things. My earliest memories are, one of the things was looking through a leaf with the sun behind it and looking at all the little veins and the cells and everything like that. So I probably always had an interest in biology, and I loved biology and science as a schoolgirl. And I do keep up with a lot of that sort of thing as I sort of, I don't know, indulge in the sort of world around climate change, if you like. And one of the things I read not that long ago was that a handful of good organic soil has more microbes in it than there are humans on the planet. And then I realized, what's Adam made of? Soil.
Yeah.
that was one thing. It was a few months later that I sort of cottoned on to that. The other thing, which is totally different, is that I belong to an environmental group called Faith for Change, which is local here to the Wirral and Liverpool. And we have not only different denominations, but different faiths. And it's always very, very interesting to find out the similarities rather than the differences between Muslims, Jews, Christians. And I absolutely love being part of that group because we just learn from one another, and it's been quite enlightening in many ways. So, I mean, we do practical stuff as well, but, you know, but being part of that wider group is very, very good, I should say. Yeah. Opens the mind up a bit.
No, I think, Christine, you're absolutely right. I think I think I referenced Jewish mysticism and the idea of tzitzim, and I don't know whether I pronounced that right. But I find that Jewish mysticism I find really inspiring, and I think there's a lot of connection between Jewish mysticism and Christianity actually. And that idea of humus, the word humility comes from soil. It's a beautiful idea that we're made up of, we come from soil, and we are birthed out of the earth, aren't we? Yeah, in a beautiful way. Yeah.
Yeah, it just made me laugh that I'd read that sort of 6 months before and then went, whoops.
Yeah. And we shall become soil as well.
Oh,
We
yes,
come from soil and we return to it. Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm planning to be composted if it's possible.
Are you?
Christine, you just reminded me of something I read the other day as well, that said that in the human body, there's more by weight in terms of bacteria and the like than almost anything. We're a colony. Even a single human is a colony of living, and we have cells that beetle around inside us, getting on with their little jobs, seemingly independent of one another, but bound together by something divine.
Yeah.
So I'm going to invite Margaret. You put a good question in the chat. Would you like to raise that? There you go.
Kat, I think you were saying Stephen.
So we've got two who've been waiting patiently.
Oh, I
in the
see.
chat,
Gotcha.
and then
Gotcha.
we'll come back
Sorry.
to Stephen,
Sorry.
if that's okay, and then Barbara.
Yes, I was just, how do we express it in church environment? I mean, I'm very comfortable with Christian animism, but I mean, if I was to say that in church, they, throw me out the door probably. So I don't quite know how it's possible to talk like this when it's just inherent that we are special. It's all the time. It seems like it's a very uphill struggle to present it in a church setting, and I just wondered if there were any thoughts on that, really.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the soul rewilding, which I think is what I would describe it as, it's a collective of like-minded Christians. I mean, there's probably about 8 of us now that are running it. And one of the things we do, we run 3-day retreats down at the Franciscan Friary in Dorset, Heelfield, and we also do sort of 2-hour immersive events around the southeast. And one of those is it's called Walking with Trees, and what we do is we talk about 3 at any one. It's about 2 hours long, and we talk about classic English trees like oak, hawthorn, and ash, maybe a yew or whatever. When we talk about the biology, we talk about the mythology and the spirituality of each of those trees in the first half, and then we do what people have described as the woo-woo bit, and we ask people to think of a dilemma, a question, a challenge, an opportunity they're facing, and then we ask them to go out and wander in the wood or the forest where we are. And then just to connect to a tree, and to relate to the tree as if it's alive, and then to first of all start by asking the tree permission if they can approach it and touch it, and then first of all listening to the tree and listening to this tree's story and its history. Some of these trees might be 100, 200 years old. What have they seen? What have they witnessed? And then once you've done that, then to tell your story and then to listen to the tree's response. And we've done this with groups of 10, 15, 30 people. And every time people come back and say, oh, never done that before, but it was amazing. I found that so powerful. It was so beautiful. And I've had people in tears. And so I think everything starts on the edge, doesn't it? I noticed that my friend Chris Bemrose is here, and Chris and I used to run a retreat on the idea of finding God in the margins. I think movements start on the edge and then they come in. And my experience has been that many Christians are open to and find the idea of Christian animism. It gels very well with the idea of an incarnate God, the idea that God is immanent in the world, that she, he, whatever is living in all living beings. So if we can relate to trees, to plants, to animals in a more empathic way, so much the better, because it allows us to get to know it better, know nature better, and to love it better. And therefore, if we can love it better, then we can protect it. So I think I'm hopeful. I think the church will change. Yeah, I don't know whether that answers your question.
Thank you.
Yeah,
It
thanks,
helps.
Margaret.
Thanks so much.
Yeah,
I'm
listen.
going to-
Somebody just said listening to a sap in a tree is magical. It certainly is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, Kat.
Not at all, not at all. I'm going to just refer to a point that Chich put in the chat and then go to you, Stephen, if that's okay. We're running low on time, and we have a few people backed up. So if you haven't put your hand up or put your comment in, maybe save it for an email exchange with Mike. So Chich, would you like to speak to the point that you made?
Thanks. Yes, I've wondered why Christianity has sometimes come so late to the party with regard to climate change and those issues. And there's so much in the New Testament about personal salvation, our relationship with Christ, Pauline writings, and so on. And there's not so much in contrast, perhaps, other than some of Jesus' parables, to land and other creatures. And the closing chapters of Job might have something to teach us there. Thanks.
Yeah, I think that's very true.
Thanks, Chich. Stephen, if you're ready to unmute yourself, that would be good.
Right. Yes, thanks, Kat. And thanks, Mike, for a great talk. I guess a unique problem, really, for Christianity in this regard is the theology of the incarnation, in that we believe that God became human, and not that God became an octopus, for example, or Australopithecus, for that matter. I mean, that's just about the ultimate privileging of humanity, really, over the rest of creation. I mean, is there any way that we can sort of get around that, or even turn it on its head, and view the theology of the incarnation as taking us down into creation almost, or leveling us in some way? I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that one.
Gosh, that's a biggie, isn't it? I always see. I mean, I'm talking very personally here, but I always see God in Christ and God on the cross as both a moment in history, but also a symbol of God throughout the whole of history, the life of the earth. In other words, God has always been in the universe, and so God was in Neanderthal, God was in Australopithecus, God was in dinosaur. So I love that quote from Raw where he talks about God loves all things by becoming all things. I mean, it sounds slightly Hindu, but I think Christianity is panentheistic. In other words, it doesn't just believe that God is out there in the heights, but it believes that the God of the depths, that God is in all things. I mean, I don't know, in my own personal theology, I see God delighting in becoming, in trying out lots of different ways of being. I mean, my guess is, if we go back to that Irish story about the bees, my guess is that the bees probably believe that one of them became, one of them was like Christ, and it was, God entered and became a bee for them to save them. I would imagine there's something like that going on. I don't know. I think the key is what I was saying, which is how do we create stories that allow everybody to belong, and not, when I say everybody, I mean all animals, all plants, all beings. Yeah. So I think there is a way around it. At the moment, and what I see Christianity doing is trying to retrofit ecology into quite a limited atonement theology, and it doesn't work. You end up with notions of stewardship and all that kind of stuff, and it's very inadequate, I'm afraid. I think faiths like Buddhism and Taoism and Hinduism have got a better theological basis for meeting the challenge of ecology at the moment. But even they are, you know, exceptionalist. I was with a bunch of Buddhists the other day, and they were saying that only 10% of human beings can become enlightened. Now, if that is isn't elitism, then I don't know what is. So they're kind of worse than Christians in some sense, but at least they're more conscious of the animal and of nature, I think, than we are as Christians. Yeah. I don't know whether that answers your question, Stephen. Probably not.
It opens things up very nicely. Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks,
I love
Stephen.
the idea of an octopus thinking that there's another octopus among them that is there to show them the divine, to be the divine.
Yeah.
Barbara.
Thank you, Mike. That was really super. I have to say that there's a lot more in the Christian tradition, scripture, and the writings, the church fathers from the early times, right through the centuries. It's not just Francis of Assisi and Hildegard of Bingen, wonderful though they are. But you're so right on our human-centeredness, I think. My late husband, Edward, had invented a word to describe how he felt we humans regarded ourselves, which was how we were. Anthroposoulism. That's not just people-centered, but it's thinking that people alone are the only things actually that matter.
Yeah.
Everything else is just wallpaper, you know.
Yeah.
And just to share with you my favorite vision, imaginary pictorial image of evolution, not mine, but is of a hedge where everything's entangled and intertwined together, rather than a pinnacle. We always think of evolution with a human sitting on top of the pile.
Yeah.
And a nod to my urbanite lovely friend Laurie. Imagine instead of a hedge, a steel bridge, Laurie, with the girders intertwining, instead of a pinnacle like the shard.
That's lovely, Barbara. I think people talk about people think of evolution as a hierarchy, as pyramidal, but actually it's dendritic. It's like a tree, and we are, you know, if you imagine evolution as being like an oak tree, we just happen to be one leaf on that oak tree, and there are lots of other forms of intelligence that we're not aware of. I mean, what I find amazing at the moment is there's so much emphasis and excitement about artificial intelligence, but there's so many other forms of intelligence which already exist on the earth, which we do not understand, which we have not researched, and only now are they beginning to break into and understand animal language. And one of the things I didn't talk about was the language of elephants. The elephants are extremely sophisticated, and their language is very sophisticated. But do we talk about that? Do we get excited about that? No, we don't. We get excited about AI and ChatGPT. It's like we're insane. We're insane. Yeah.
Thank you, Mike. I think we've got time for one more question, possibly two. Kathy, it's your turn. And you're still on mute.
Thank you. It's not really a question. It's more like a comment. Oh, by the way, Mike, thank you very much. It's really, really interesting. I belong to a nice, friendly Church of England church. And just yesterday, we had a Ask the Clergy evening. And so I tried to ask about climate change and environmental issues, because I once went, well, I mean, I've been involved in it for some years, and I once went to a day about it in a church. This is maybe about 15 years ago, when this sort of knowledge of climate change and things was just beginning to grow. But nobody else wanted to go. And since then, I found my church really hasn't talked about it very much at all. And so I asked about this, and he said, well, actually, we are on the Echo Church Silver or something, or working towards the Silver accreditation. He hadn't even mentioned this. I didn't know about this at all. You know, it's not a chance, something we have a chance to discuss. And the sort of animal welfare and side of that too, that's also a little bit odd, because just recently we had a pet blessing service, and the vicar's got 2 dogs. He absolutely loves dogs, and you know, I got all these dogs and other animals into the church. The next Sunday, they decided to do a church Sunday lunch, which I didn't go to for my own reasons, because they were actually promoting it as it is meat and right so to do, as in MEAT, promoting meat. And I gather they actually had pork. And I thought, well, now this I can't actually ask, but doesn't he know that pigs are just as intelligent as dogs?
Yeah, I think that's so true, Kathy. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, good point.
No, you're spot on. You're spot
And
on.
the challenges that you mentioned there, Kathy, maybe give us a shove in the small of the back to think about how we can help tool people up to encourage their churches into more reflection on these issues. Maybe that's an avenue for us to explore, to try and make sure that you've got and you're aware of anything that we can do to help to really embed it in people's souls. I'm going to wind us up now, and it breaks my heart a bit because there are some really good points in the chat, which I am happy to save and anonymize and send out by email to anyone who wants it. So if you do want it, please email me at, I'll put it in the chat, Jenkins at, I'm sure you know the drill by now.
Kat, as you're doing that, is it okay if I just say a few words about soul rewilding?
I was about to say, please do that. It's a good
Sorry,
time.
shall I do that now as you're putting
Do it
your
now. No, don't.
So we have a website called Soul Rewilding, which I think Kat is going to share with you. So as I was saying, Soul Rewilding is it's a not-for-profit collective, and it's a response to this spiritual crisis. And what we're trying to do really is to help people find an older story. So it's kind of helping people rediscover these old stories, one of which I shared with you earlier on, and helping people reconnect hearts, bodies, and minds to the sacred wildness of nature and our inner soulfulness. So it's about giving people, if you like, a sense of direction and clarity, a sense of purpose in the midst of the crisis, and hope, a sense of agency and equanimity, but also to help them discover their gifts, so they can make a positive difference. And one of our aims is to create a community that will help people in that journey. So next year, just to highlight, if you go onto the website, you'll find these things. But we're running 2 3-day retreats, one of which last year Damien came on. So we're running a retreat called Reconnecting to Sacred Nature, which is all around these themes. One in April, one in June. That's going to be at Hillfield Friary in Dorset. And we're also running a series of short immersive events around the southeast. Walking with trees. We do another thing called a meditative walk on the life of Gaia. We're doing Dawn Chorus Vigil, so it's all about bird song. And we're just starting on the 12th of November a monthly online gathering called Soul Garden, which is just an hour and a half every month, just to gather people together to mark the seasons. And then Paula, my wife, will be running some biannual community days at Hillfield, where you can get involved in practically helping the Franciscan community there with things like hedge laying and foraging and whatnot. So if you're interested, please get in touch and come and join us. That would be really lovely to see you at some of those events. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks so much for sharing that, Mike. And I think for my part, thank you so much for what you've given us to think about today. Yeah. Feel free to unmute. I can see Mary's clapping there. I'm very conscious that you have a dinner appointment in 5 minutes. 6 minutes. So thank you for having accommodated us today and given us so much to think about. I've put your website on the chat, and if anybody would like an anonymized copy of the chat, just drop me an email and I'll sort that out. Mike, thank you.
Thanks, Kat. Thanks for having me, everybody. Take care. God bless.
God bless.